Welcome back for another session of our committee around reopening schools for the Monroe School District. And it's great to see you. I thought we had a really productive meeting last week, and I'm looking forward to a continuation of that today. We're going to continue to make progress and move further into the discussion around plans. Just wanted to turn things over to Dr. Blasko for a few opening comments on his part.
So again, thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate, I want to say this is session 5. Is that accurate, Spencer? Is it session 5?
Yep.
So thank you very much for your continued participation and feedback. We've seen that branch out to some of the social media feeds in Monroe, and we appreciate those conversations happening again with your neighbors, your colleagues. Again, I think, you know, part of some of the things that I've become aware of. I mean, this is really, again, the 30,000 foot level of working with our community, working with our labor partners, and really understanding, you know, here's the structure of what we think we can do within the construct of the OSPI reopening guidance. We're going to talk about some feedback we've received from a survey that we deployed this week to families. We've begun some formal discussions with one of our labor groups, and I think it's important to understand that while this session is structural in nature, as far as like kind of broad brush, this is what we think this could look like. There's a lot of technical details that will follow, and there's a lot of things that we need to circle back to our teachers and circle back to our principals and work with our staff around how's this going to work. So if the hybrid model, if our B1 model, our hybrid model is where we're going, what is that going to look like? What does having kids 2 days in class and 3 days on campus look like moving forward? And that's all work that is a little bit overwhelming, and you know, many of you are aware of the kind of the seismic shift that took place in King County this last couple of days, and I wish that my crystal ball wouldn't have been as clear as it was last week when I said, you know, the safety measures is our #1 priority. We've identified that as a priority in this committee, and that's something that's going to be a driver for the recommendation that we make to the school board. We've also received the OSPI guidance. The OSPI guidance has demonstrated a lot of, again, technical components of things that we will have to provide to our school board to adopt in order to safely start schools. And those have to do with the labor and industry requirements, the requirements of attestations of health, thermometers, all of those technical sides of the pieces that are, I think, the next steps beyond the decision that this team is working on. Again, I think the other elephant in the room, we started with an elephant in the room last week, might as well start with an elephant in the room this week. There's a lot of pressure when we have a neighboring district that we are partnered or bumped up against, North Shore, who has come out with their plan, and they've communicated that plan on their website. There's a 26-minute video of the superintendent and their labor president of their education association. You know, those are steps that you know, kind of cause us to say, wow, you know, they've been working on that for a long time as well. And they, many of you will recall that they were the first district to close and the first district to go all online. So there were some steps that they had made previous to that decision that isn't necessarily specific to Monroe. And again, we're focused on Monroe and what's best for Monroe. Just to allay some probably concerns that many of you might have is the work that we're doing here is not going to be lost. We know that face-to-face instruction is what our teachers have trained to do. It's what our administrators have been trained to support. And so, you know, I will say my belief is that that's when we're at our best, is when our teachers have kids in front of them and our schools have kids in them, and that we're delivering that instruction face-to-face. And we're in a global pandemic, and we're in a state where COVID is spiking. And so our ability to do that is really being challenged right now. But we've made some great steps to understand what a preliminary step could be, perhaps if we are having to open online, then what would that next step be? Well, that next step would be a hybrid. And I think, if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at North Shore's opening plan, I think they do a nice job of communicating kind of that spectrum from 100% online to when it's safe and, probably either herd immunity or some type of a medical intervention in the COVID process, that it's safe to have all of our kids back. And they've kind of gone soup to nuts and presented that back to their community. And I anticipate that is the communication that we're going to have. But there's a lot of steps between now and then. The work that we do here, then after this work is completed, the work we do with our labor partners moving forward to understand, bargaining the impacts of the shift from what our current collective bargaining agreements talk about of what school looks like to what we're saying, well, okay, so if the school looks like this, what are components that we have to negotiate and work through in order to bargain the effect of that? And that's kind of the labor management language component of that. And so there's multiple steps to this. This is, in my mind, as I frame this is kind of step one. And there's multiple steps after this that have to happen before September 9th. Which is our opening day of school. So appreciate you being back here. Please know that no one wants to be on a rubber stamp committee, and this is not a rubber stamp committee. This is really good feedback, good work, good movement for us to have these discussions and dialogue and to think about things that we might not have been able to think about without each of you here. And I just appreciate, again, you being here, and I'm thankful for this committee. Again, we'll review some of the things when Kim's section comes in. I think Erin has been working on tabulating some results. So we're going to have some data to reflect back to you on what our community has said, and should be an engaging session. And I'm thankful again that you're here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin. So yes, we have a big agenda today. We're going to cover a lot of ground, and just to start off with some formalities. Did everyone have an opportunity to look at the minutes from last week's meeting? And you saw any questions, any concerns about that? Okay, we're good there. Just a reminder about, or just a statement about the goals for today's meeting, which is mainly to consider further developed options for consideration and gather additional feedback. So as Justin is saying, this is an important opportunity to be able to get your perspectives, multiple perspectives from many different viewpoints, so that you can inform the continuing development of this process and how we're going to be opening schools. And also, as Justin said, just a reminder, I know I do this every time, and it's probably a little tedious, but this group is mainly operating at a higher perspective level. It's not to get into the weeds, although we'll be asking you for some ideas as we go forward today. But it's basically to be staying in the place of saying, is this plan within the scope and meet the expectations of the primary considerations? Do we feel that it is in that area that we can be comfortable that it meets the values of the community and the Monroe School District? So that's the important aspect of your work that we're looking for continuing guidance on. With that, I'd just like to remind you all of our primary considerations, which were safety, physical and social emotional safety, equity, plans that give priority to students who need the most attention and resource, the best possible learning experience under the circumstances that we're faced, flexibility for students, family, and staff. Individual circumstances will be taken into consideration. Sustainability is an important one that I want to keep reminding everybody about. The logistics, the consistency, and the district's ability to deliver on this plan over time. without breaking the budget or without breaking people, which are the most important resource that we have. And then finally, the community partnership, consistent care, and transparent communication moving forward. So those are our main guideposts that we've established, and I thought you chose those very well as being our guiding principles for how to evaluate the plan going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who is going to lead us into further discussion and consideration of where the plan is. And also, I know there's a part of that is going to be sharing of some information of the survey, as Justin has mentioned. So, Ms. Whitworth.
Thank you, Spencer. Good afternoon. It's good to see everybody again. I just want to take us back a little bit so that we can remember the journey that we've been on here. We were faced and tasked with this just incredible job of figuring out what is a hybrid model. If we're not all in school 5 days a week and we're not completely online, there's going to be a time, whether it's in September or whenever, where we're going to have some kids in school and some kids not in school. And what does teaching and learning look like for those that are there? And then when they're not there, whatever kind of model it is. So we ended up having B1, which was our plan or our option that had the most support. And one of the things that we've kind of laughed about, it's really interesting how B1 seems to be a lot of districts, option that they've decided to go with. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I think that means we did a good job. So anyway, so there's B1. With B1, some things that we really appreciated about this that we heard from you was that our youngest learners, those who needed the most in terms of getting those foundational skills of reading and math, had more face-to-face time. It was also in this model where our students who need more, whether it's because they have IEP goals that need to be met in a different way, or they're below standard and are receiving LAP services, or they're ELL students and receiving services that way, they would also have the opportunity to have more face-to-face time. So that was helping with our equity lens as we were looking through that. Then the rest of it was just kind of A-B days and all of that. And a lot of this depends on how many students are going to be enrolled in kindergarten first and second. And is it kindergarten? Is it kindergarten 1, kindergarten 1, 2? And looking at capacity that way. What days is really going to depend on what works best for our community, and that's our families. And it's also our teachers giving input to say, we really feel like we can deliver services better if the days are consecutive. Or if they're consecutive, or if they're broken up a little bit so that kids have some time to process between when we deliver instruction and when we see them the next time. So these are still things that we're gathering input and from our community. We're going to be going over the survey, and Erin's going to walk you through it. There's some things that we're going to want you to discuss, and I'm just going to go ahead and mention those now so that after Erin's done, we can go ahead and go to the breakout sessions, but they're on your agenda. It's what does the survey results tell us? What is that data saying in terms of what families are looking for? What work do we need to do to prepare for B1? What other things do we need to do to make this plan work? What is something else that we maybe just have not thought of yet that we need to start considering? And I think one of the things I'm just going to add a little bit more there is a really great idea was work groups. And so that might be something if you're thinking about what work groups do we need to have continuing on. And I can see a lot of this being work groups around transportation, teacher work groups to really help develop what does online learning and what does a hybrid model look like. With that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite Erin to please come and share the survey and how we should be looking at that.
Okay, so you all should have the PDF document of the survey results in your inbox. If you want to go ahead and pull that up. Our work group came up with these survey questions and sent this out earlier in the week in response to this committee's desire to have data on how many of our students plan to return and what their preferred learning model would be if they return. The survey was sent out on Tuesday morning, and we have received an overwhelming response from our families. When I pulled the data at 11:30 today, we had roughly 40% of our currently enrolled families respond. That didn't include Sky Valley Education Center families, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. And to some, a 40% return rate might sound not very good, but if you are experienced in collecting data through surveys, that is an incredible return rate. Most surveys yield an average of 10 to 15% response return rate. So the fact that we have 40% and it's only 2 days into the survey being out is incredible, and the responses are still rolling in very rapidly. We did not send the survey to Sky Valley Education Center families, which is our parent partnership school, because their learning model is structured very differently than the rest of our schools. And in talking with Principal Karen Rosencrantz, she didn't feel that the data collected on this survey would be helpful for their planning moving forward. And I share that because I don't want anyone in our community to think that we don't care what Sky Valley Education Center families think. We care very much, and their input is just as important. The survey just wouldn't have been beneficial for their planning. We did send the survey out in English and Spanish, as we have a large percentage of our families who speak Spanish. And so we want to make sure we capture their input as well. I set up the survey so that the first question was, what's your preferred language? If they selected Spanish, it would immediately jump to the Spanish questions. So if you selected English, you didn't see any of the Spanish, but rest assured it was in Spanish fully for all of our Spanish families. If you took the survey, you may have noticed, or you may have heard comments or seen comments on Facebook that depending on your responses on the survey, you may have only seen a select few pages of the survey. And that's because I set it up so that if you answered that you preferred the hybrid model on the first question, then you were asked additional questions about that, like what days of the week would you prefer? Will you be using transportation? If someone selected that they are planning to pursue other schooling options or preferred the remote learning option only, they weren't asked those questions. So they might have only seen question 1 and then skipped to the last question. So it wasn't that the survey was built wrong, it was intentional that way. I think that is all I wanted to walk through. I think the results are pretty self-explanatory. You can see what our families chose on the pie chart, and then there are tons and tons and tons of questions and comments that they had at the end. I think there's over 60 pages of comments, so it might take a while to read those. I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have about the survey.
I do. I'd like to know who's going to respond to all those questions in the survey, and how is that going to happen?
That is a great question. I don't think we can respond to every single question, and Justin, you're welcome to weigh in on this, but our plan is to build a frequently asked questions page on our website so that we can address most of them. A lot of the comments that you'll see are just, I want to be back in school full time, and we understand that.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, and Erin and I have been talking probably, the sweet spot for a video is about 3 minutes. And so, if we can capture some big thematic things that come out of that, we're working to prepare a video with me next week to send out to families, just, hopefully addressing some of those pieces. And, as you go through, you'll be able to identify some of the themes that come out. I would echo what Erin said. Probably the biggest response that I've had in my email box after the survey deployed was, why is there not 100% back in school option? So I think that's kind of, you all have been students of this game. You understand the OSPI reopening. You understand that we've been talking about 6 feet, social distancing. How many kids can we fit in our classroom? Our facilities department has been working on that. We have Devlin and Victor who've been working in all of our schools to determine that about 14 to 16 kids can fit in our classrooms, socially distanced. And in addition to that, socially distanced from the teacher at the front of the classroom. That's an important math problem, or an important variable of that math equation to consider. But it's obvious that we've not communicated that out to our families, that I think they're thinking full square footage, and some of the things that we talked about as well is we might have square footage to fit more kids, but who's going to be instructing those students? And so there's some thematic things, and we're hopeful to, again, the FAQ page and perhaps a video that will address some of those most frequent, and just give them an update on where we're at process-wise.
Muted, Spencer.
Sorry about that. Kim, did you want to add anything more before we went into the breakout rooms, or are we good to go with those questions?
We're good to go with those questions.
Okay. So we're going to move into the breakout rooms. Remember these questions that Kim shared with us. You're going to have an opportunity to look at the survey and dig into that a little bit, and then also think about the additional questions. So the survey, what does it tell us? What work do we need to do in order to prepare for B1? What other things do we need to be thinking about to make this plan work? That's the goals of the breakout time. And then once again, as we've done in the past, we'll ask for a breakout reporter to share what your group talked about. We're going to go into the rooms now, and because we've got a pretty sizable task for you to do between the survey and that other conversation, we're going to go until 5 o'clock, so 35 minutes in the breakout room, and that'll give you time to really look thoughtfully at the survey and have some good internal conversation about that. Any questions before we dive into that process? Okay, very good. So I'm going to ask Jesse to get us divided out into rooms, and I've had some issues with Zoom rooms this week in another district, so I'm hoping that that will not befall Monroe as well. But good luck getting into Zoom. Well, thank you all. It is good to see you all back, and I hope you had some interesting conversations, and we'd like to listen in on them here a little bit vicariously. So if the group report person could share out, I would love that. And just, who'd like to start? Todd? Great, thank you, Todd.
On my volume here. So in answer, there was just 2 of us this week. To answer the question, what does the survey tell us? I think one is people are engaged, which is great. 40% response rate is out of this world as far as surveys goes. So that's awesome. But I think to see the small response from the Latino population is a little bit concerning, given we've talked a lot about trying to engage them. And, you know, it's possible that maybe it's underrepresented because some of them might be responding in English, and our only way to know is which button they clicked. So it's possible that we're getting a better representation than what that pie chart shows. But also we were thinking that perhaps a lot of them have a technological barrier, and you know that one of the things we're concerned about is they're having a hard time accessing the survey. Surveys sometimes are difficult to access by your phone, and a lot of them might only have a phone, a smartphone to be able to do that. So is there a way to send it out again in a way that maybe helps on the phone side? I don't know. I only looked at it from the email side, so there might be something there. We also saw that Frank Wagner appeared to be underrepresented, but we think that might be tied to the Latino, because that's a high Latino population at that school. So But other than that, we felt like it was also a good broad representation of the schools, which is great. We thought it was interesting that either model, whether the back-to-back days or the Tuesday, Thursday, it was kind of split 50-50. So the good news for you guys is you're going to make just as many people mad as you are happy. That's the good news and the bad news, I guess. But I think what that really tells us is that now we can go to the teachers and see which way works better for them to present education to kids and let that help determine which way we go. And then also let the budget people weigh in on how much we can save from a cleaning school perspective. And then the decision can really be based on those factors, since it's about 50-50 with parents. So what we need to work on, what we need to do based on the survey results is we felt like, not that I love surveys, but maybe some additional surveying would be in order to fine tune the question a little bit. There was one area in particular, and that's where in the comment section of the survey we felt like there was a fairly consistent pattern of two ends of the spectrum. There were some parents who were saying, my kid is only going to do the online model no matter what. So the question is, for the district, is right now the way the survey was worded is you had to go, at least the way I understood it, you had to go outside of the district to do that. So is there going to be an option within district to have your kid enrolled in Monroe schools yet 100% online? And if so, how many are thinking that would be an option for them? And then the flip side to that is you had a lot of parents say, hey, both me and my husband or me and my wife are working full time. What are we going to do with our kid? We can't afford daycare. What are we going to do with our kid for the other 3 days of the week? And so I think there's a way to flesh that out a little bit more, even to the point of saying, hey, you talked about that there's potentially 16 seats in a classroom. And as I recall, that our typical class size is 26. So that's 13 if you divide it in half. So there's at least 3 extra seats that maybe you could accommodate some of these kids in that classroom for the full week for those parents who need that. It might not be the kids' education that needs it, but the parents need it so they can work for a living and whatnot. So I think there's some ways for us to flesh that out a little more. And then also to track if there's some hand raisers out there that say, hey, my kid wants to be in the district, but wants to be 100% online, that could free up a seat for some of those kids that need to be in school that full week. So there might be a way to balance those. Wouldn't it be great if you had just enough seats be given up to accommodate those that need it? But a way to try to pull that together. Again, and I don't know, we thought additional surveying might be the way to try to articulate or ascertain that. And then as far as what other considerations should we be thinking about? We talked a little bit about trying to do subcommittees specific to each of the educational things. And it's like, that's something we probably need to jump on now. If we go another meeting or two without doing that, it'll probably won't be worth it. And then as far as the social and emotional aspect of the kids, this survey wasn't really intended to address that. But I think that's a consideration that's very high on our list that we need to be concerned about as we go forward. And to me, it's, and maybe this has already thought about being changed, but as I understand it, there's a currently, or at least at the end of last year, was this rule where no staff member could be on a Zoom meeting with a child without the child's parent or parental figure present on the call. And that, you have a situation where maybe there's abuse or alcoholism in the family and it's by that parent, and a counselor is trying to talk with a kid about those issues. It's very hard when that parent is sitting there on that call. And so obviously it's not ideal, but in these unique times while we're doing this hybrid model, to allow counselors and staff to have those direct one-on-one calls with students via Zoom without that requirement, or maybe you have 2 staff members on the staff side to protect the liability side from that perspective, but not require the student to have a parent. And then also we talked a little bit last time about a half-day model, and this didn't really address that. Is that still something we're contemplating? Is that something we want to talk about further? And then the other comment that we saw a lot of on the comment section was around electives. And we were thinking also, you know, it might be hard to do electives at all. That's one of the things we talked about. But also, could we move electives to the 100% online model? And would that free up more slots for kids to be able to come in to get their basic education? Getting back to the kind of that conversation we had earlier. So those were the other considerations. That pretty much summed it up for us.
Great. Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive. Another group. Jason, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a couple of things that were in line with Todd's group. As far as going on the line, what does the survey tell us? I think it met expectations for the most part. I personally was a bit surprised that the 6.5% were considering pulling from MSD altogether. But it was nice to see that if we're able to go back, the majority of the community does support that hybrid model, 70% or so. There is a theme in the comments that remote learning aspect needs to be better, more enhanced. I think we can all agree with that. And there needs to be a way to ensure student engagement somehow for those students who aren't self-motivated. As far as what we need to do to prepare for B1, we need to ensure partnerships with parents that they watch their child closely, monitoring their health and ensure they keep them home if any symptoms show up. With the understanding that the overall general health of all students and their families start with each one of us triaging at home first. We can't just send our kids to school. Oh, you got a little cough, you're fine. You know, that's out now. We desperately need to understand the improvements that remote learning will cover, whether it's continuous learning 2.0 or whatever that's called. A lot of parents want to know what that is now, because that will help guide their decision on how they want to proceed. Parents are concerned about how robust the new platform is going to be. Daycare needs for parents who both work outside the home and need their children in school. Are there ways for the district to assist with that in some way? Partnering with local organizations or something. And then, like Todd said, social and emotional needs are a big one. Several parents made it very clear that depression and anxiety were very big and very real in their homes. So how can the district better support those students through counseling or somehow virtual get-togethers? I don't know what that looks like, but that was a big concern. Other things we need to think about to make the plan work, continuing to make safety number one, based on current data and trends. The thing to think about, what about teachers with young families who are in a district that has a different opening schedule? You know, to North Shore, for example, if they don't align with us. If their own children have a differing schedule, how can we expect them to leave their child at home to come teach our children? How do we get kids that need extra assistance, whether that's IEPs or children who are in AP classes need some extra assistance? How do we get them what they need? And then thinking about from a union perspective, if WAA can't support in-person learning this fall, how does that impact MSD? And what is MEA's take on everything? And do they align with the WAA overall? So that's just some of the concerns that we thought of in our group.
Great, thank you very much. Another group, please.
I can go.
Yes, please, thank you.
This is Shaerie. Okay, so we talked a lot about that. We were happy to see that according to the data, 93.6% of the people that responded do want to remain in Monroe. We thought that was a very good sign. And then we also noticed that many people were talking about safety as a priority. And the way the question was worded, it did say, if, in capital letters, we are able to safely offer in-person instruction. So I don't know how they would respond if the question had been, with the current statistics related to COVID-19, would we return to school with the current data that we're seeing in Snohomish County? So we were wondering if that would change the survey results. And we also noticed that safety is a huge priority. It seemed like we saw safety over and over and over. But we kind of got off topic because we started talking about, in order to prepare for B1, I'm not certain that the parents know what B1 entails in the schools. And there's a lot that needs to be done, and we probably needed to start doing it last April, as far as getting on the buses safely, you know, loading and unloading, masking up, plexiglass, coming into the building, getting your temperature checked, going to your classroom and sitting in your seat. I think parents are thinking that this is going to be like normal school, where the students can, you know, work with each other. We can't work with each other. Like, teachers nonstop will be keeping kids apart. That would be our job, to keep them safe. So we talked a little bit about that and what it would entail and how much money it really would cost to bring children in safely and staff in safely. And I personally am worried about their emotional and what would happen emotionally for my students if we lost a child in class or we lost a teacher. I've experienced that my second year of teaching, and it wasn't good for my class the rest of the year. It was horrid. And I just think that could be a reality if we come back too soon. And that scares me to death for those children, because that's a bigger recovery. It's one thing to be at home now and long for school. It's quite another to be in school and lose a classmate. And we've experienced that at Park Place, and it was terrible. And then just like, as a community of educators, we're trained, and it's our responsibility to keep children safe. Safety is our #1 priority for our students in school, no matter what it is, from breaking up a fight, from putting our body in the way of an active shooter. Whatever we do, it's about the safety of our students. And at this time, there's no way that our students are safe in our classrooms. It's impossible, in my opinion. And so, while I love this committee, I think we need to, and we'll need this at some point, but I think we need to refocus and get to the point where we're telling the community we're going full remote so that they can prepare for the school year, so that our staffs can prepare for the school year, because people are reaching out left and right saying, just tell us what's going to happen so that we can prepare. And for us to have a robust distance learning 2.0, 3.0, whatever we want to call it for Monroe, and do a really, really good job at that, we need to start doing it now. And all of the teachers know that. But we're not going to start now if we're going back into our buildings. We don't need to.
Okay, thank you very much, Shaerie. Next group.
Spencer, I can share. I just have a few things to add on to that.
Thanks very much, Brett.
So I think just what else does the survey tell us? I think it's highlighting our community pretty divided, probably pretty common across communities in our state and elsewhere. I think you have everything from the extreme of, folks that think of this as all a hoax to the opposite side, and, folks that are really scared and everything in between. So that's challenging. We kind of talked about it as a lose-lose, no matter what, like a group of folks are going to be upset with the decision. I think it also highlights haves and have-nots. We have families that, maybe have one parent that works and another parent that stays home, and daycare isn't really a huge issue, or parents that can work from home. We have also families that have single parents who have to work and can't do that remotely. And so that makes this challenging. I would echo what Shaerie said. It seems like, just reading through the comments, like we just need to tell our families sooner than later so that they can make their plans and prepare for what lies ahead. One of the things we talked about as far as other things we need to think about if we were to do a hybrid model, and this is something that I hadn't really thought through, but this idea that groups of kids will have to stay together so that, if one group of students, if 12 or 15 or whatever, if one of those students comes down with COVID, like that group would then quarantine. And so how, like at a high school, you have kids that are on all kinds of different pathways and taking different math classes. Like, how do you pull that off when each kid, needs something different? Like, how do you group kids in a similar fashion when many of them need different electives or different things to graduate? So that would be a pretty big question for us to consider if we get to a hybrid type model and we're keeping groups of kids together. So that was the only other thing that maybe hadn't been brought up yet.
Great. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite another group to share.
Spencer, I'll talk for Mike Birch and I. I guess from the survey, this is Terry. From the survey, we were kind of surprised the number of parents that mentioned that this is a joke or a fake news and didn't really understand the severity of what's going on. I think there is going to need to be education on why we can't go back fully 100% back in the building. There was another comments that people either are choosing not to understand it, or maybe there is a lack of communication why we can't be 100% back in the building for us. I think that's something that's going to have to really be addressed. Mike talked about there isn't a need on the bus for social distancing. There are no requirements for that. But the average length of a bus ride, and it really depends upon where the kid is picked up, can be up to 45 minutes, which is really close to the amount of time the kids are in a classroom. So there's going to have to be education of parents. Why aren't we socially distancing students on the buses? Another bus issue that came up, I think Mike mentioned last week, kid shows up to the bus stop, driver pulls up, screened, has the temperature where we can't let them on the bus. What does the driver do? How do we address not leaving the kid alone, which for some of our families, that could take a long period of time. Some things we're going to need to do, similar to Brett's question about groups of kids. Do we move kids or do we move teachers? If you move kids, how do we clean and make sure the desks are sanitized in between those sessions? That's going to be a challenge. At the end of the day, it's probably easier to do than if you're moving kids 5 or 6 different periods during the day. That's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to address. A concern that was not really brought up in the survey, but we've heard over before, is bandwidth capabilities within a home. If we have kids doing online at the same time, we've had a number of families that really don't have the bandwidth to pull that off. So I understand the reason to try to keep families consistent, but that's going to be an issue we'll have to address down the road. So that was kind of our topic, Spencer, that we talked about.
Great. Thank you, Terry.
I'll go now.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Anna, beat you to it. The same things about what we noticed about the survey is pretty much the same as the other groups. Jeff Presley had a good point, though, that about a quarter of our families prefer the remote learning model, which is pretty significant and tells us that many of our families are not feeling safe to return to school. Everything else in that was pretty much the same as everybody else. What do we need to prepare for option B1? We felt that we need logistical procedures spelled out for all of our staff of how we're going to keep everyone safe. So what are bathroom breaks going to look like? How are things going to be cleaned between kids? How are we going to handle when kids need help opening things at lunchtime? How are we screening? What are hand washing procedures? What do we do about students who refuse to wear masks? What do we do when a kid's symptomatic at school? All the sharing of materials, so many things that we need to figure out logistical procedures for. And then what are the protocols for handling cases of COVID? So if a student has a confirmed case or a family member of a teacher is confirmed, how are we handling that? Are we quarantining the whole class for 2 weeks? What are the procedures for that? How are we going to handle teaching assignments for the different models of learning? So if we have a group of kids who is doing all remote and then a group of kids who's doing the hybrid, is the same teacher responsible for both groups? Are there different teachers for different groups? Expectations for remote learning at what it's going to look like at all levels. So what are grades going to look like? What's attendance going to look like? All of those things. And then we felt that it'd be important for teachers to have training on remote learning. So when we flipped the switch in March, they never got any training, and it's new to everyone, and felt that adequate training is really important. And then we talked about more family connections to support learning. So our teachers and our staff did a great job of connecting with families, but it wasn't always necessarily about how to support learning. It was more of how are you doing and what can we do to support you emotionally. So we thought that would be a huge piece of learning moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much. And now, Anna.
Thanks. So in terms of the 3 questions, in terms of the survey takeaways, I think both in the comments as well as in the question, we noticed that people really want their kids back in person in some way. 70% said they would send kids back in a hybrid model, and there were many comments about the impacts that this is having on kids. So just to keep that in the back of our mind as we move forward with whatever model, that parents are really wanting that interaction and the social emotional benefits that school brings, and everyone's struggling with it not being there. I think everything else on our survey had already been said. In terms of preparing for B1, we actually started from a point kind of that Erin just touched on, of really saying that we need to, from the get-go, separate out those who ultimately would end up in a hybrid model, whether we start that way or not, and those who would never opt for that model. And from the get-go, identify staff to lead a 100% virtual model for the year, because we know that we'll have families who need that, and that needs to be separate from a hybrid model, because to ask staff to balance both kids who are 100% online and kids who are there sometime in person would be next to impossible. Along those lines, though, both for anybody who's online 100% of the time as well as in person for B1, just around those logistics. So consistency in Canvas is something we talked about. Carlos was in my group saying that he pushed into a lot of different classes and having that challenge of not having consistency of what it looked like or what was up there or that kind of thing. We talked about the need to determine which students outside of pre-K through second would need 4 days a week. What are the guidelines for that? How are we determining who needs more and who can get away, quote unquote, with 2? We also talked about training, but really a wide range of training. So teacher training on distance learning best practices on Canvas, more so other staff who are supporting who may not know Canvas and how that support looks, parent family training on Canvas, and then also in multiple languages. So how do our families that don't speak English access training around Canvas and online, and then student training around Canvas and expectations and everything. We also talked about protocols for when people get sick, cleaning protocols, custodial protocols, protocols for moving around the building, and then health protocols and logistics, really kind of getting down to the nitty gritty. In terms of other things that we need to be thinking about, our group talked about ELL learners and how we serve them, given language barriers in families and language barriers within the lessons. A lot what we saw in the spring was reading lessons online, and some of our ELL learners really struggled with that because it wasn't in their native language. How are we going to serve students who receive extra services such as speech and OT and PT and those kind of things? We talked about the need to identify assessment models in however we go back to determine where kids are at and how we respond to what we learn for where they're at in their learning. We talked about SEL and how do we build strong relationships to start the year. Teachers won't have the 2/3 of the year they had this past year to fall back on those relationships. They'll be starting with brand new kids. Kids will be starting with new teachers. How are we building those relationships intentionally? We specifically talked about pre-K and kinders who are starting their school experience online, and what extra supports do we need to put in place for them? And then just a reminder that we need to find multiple ways to communicate with families. I think it was Tod who started in saying that we didn't get a high response from some demographics, and how can we leverage texting or calling or other forms of communication to make sure we're hearing from all the stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Joanne, please.
Okay, so in our group, many of the things have already been covered, so I'm not going to touch too much on those. What the survey told us, which others have said, is that many of our families are ready for a hybrid model when it's safe. I think that there was a lot of comments about safety. A lot of families would love to have their children back, close to 70%. But when it's safe, I think that there was a lot of safety. What I think the survey told us is we have a lot of work to do in family education and educating our families out there and our parents out there. And part of that education will most likely revolve around, what does distance learning look like? What distance learning is different than in classroom learning, and it looks different, and parents need to understand what that difference, what does that look like? What are those expectations, and that kind of thing. What work do we need to do to prepare for B1? And what we talked about was we need to be able to communicate our full plan, and if that is starting in a full distance model, when we can safely move to a phased in or plan, then we need to be able to communicate. And when we do that, we thought that we really have to, how are we going to determine who are truly our neediest students? And because if we come back in phases, maybe that's even a smaller group than B1 is actually targeting, and how are we going to determine who are those students that really need to be in our classes the most? Who are the students that need food? I mean, if a student needs food every day and doesn't have that, does that move them right to the top of the neediest list? If a student needs special services, does that move them up there? Does family situations such as no childcare, does that move them up there in our ranking of who truly need, when it's safe to bring kids back? What does that look like, and how are we going to determine that? We talked a lot about that we believe that we're really at the point where we really have to begin to define some of those logistical processes, get some of that worked out, some of the details worked out so that we can communicate out to families. Things like, what is a day going to look like? How long is it going to be? How much live time versus, how much synchronous learning would we hope that some students can attend, and what's the asynchronous opportunities for families that have different schedules, and we know that families come in all different shape, sizes, and models, and there are many, many needs that will need to be met. Other things that we need to think about, again, in there we put families that need childcare, families that don't have options, just more thought around that. Thought around for families, will students have consistent teachers? So if we start in and I think this has already been brought up, if we start in an all distance model, will they stay with their same teacher if later in the year we're able to phase some students in and they're able to come in? Would that change their teacher or not? So thought about that. Really we thought that there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done about food service and communications with families about what food service is going to look like, what are those requirements for families that are going to need food service, how are we going to help bridge that gap so that we are able to provide those meals for our needy families, and that we are able to get that information to them. One of the biggest things we talked about is the partnership that we need to build with families. We need to build partnerships with our parents so that they are our true partners if we in distance learning or in a phased in model, because that is a very different model than our traditional school model. We talked about the support that our teachers are going to need. We need to support our teachers so that and one of those things is even helping them understand that distance learning is different than in classroom learning. and so that they're able to have those tools that they're going to need to make that switch for themselves also, and for their students and others.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more group or two more groups? Niall, please.
So a lot of what was already said, our group talked about with building family partnerships and really establishing feedback cycles for how students are doing. And we also talked a little bit about what Tod had mentioned of perhaps getting more information. And I just as Tod was talking, I really appreciated his creativity and how are we getting creative about getting students that need access. From what the survey told us, we talked about the need for childcare, as well as concerns about providing the best support for students on either IEPs or in our special programs, or just may need additional support. There's also, as was already stated, confusion or need for further clarification about why are we not going back 5 days a week, as well as if we did start off fully online, would we possibly be able to go back or reevaluate opening a hybrid model? What is that point? When do we make those decisions? As well as some of the logistical questions of, if we started all online and then did move to hybrid, are those half days? Are those full days? What does that look like? So some of that clarification. It also seemed like families, they want to keep their students together, their siblings together. So when we've got kids in different grades, how do we keep them on the same days of the week during the hybrid model? As far as preparing, I think one of the things that we need to do is similar to what everybody has mentioned, is building social emotional supports, as well as partnering with families to help them be a partner in education. Parents need that, and they need support from teachers who are trained in that to help them navigate through, how do I help my kid at home? So really building up those supports, I think, is going to be critical. And then another aspect, which I don't think has been mentioned here today, is how are we managing the instruction and feedback cycles for students without internet? So even if we're in a hybrid model, we've got kids that won't be able to have access for a variety of reasons. The most difficult of that is geography. But how are we managing the logistics around getting materials out to those families, getting their students feedback quickly, and providing that feedback cycle. And then further things to think about, just more social emotional support. And again, the FAQs, like Erin was mentioning earlier, I think is going to be a critical piece in providing more communication with families. And I think that is about it for now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Is there another group?
I can go.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So much has already been said, especially I really appreciated what Joanne and what Shaerie were both saying. For the results, what they tell us is just, we have a very divided community. We have a community that can't agree on what facts are. And I wonder if we should just put in, okay, believe what you want, but these are the facts that we are using. Like this is what we're doing. We talked a lot about equity, and especially with the Spanish speaking. We had Kelly, who is the director of dining services in our group. She talked about the issues with sending lunch home, but then how we take attendance. So like if you send lunch home on a Tuesday for lunch on a Wednesday, but then they don't access anything Wednesday and they're marked absent, then they don't actually count for getting that lunch that day. And so there's kind of a difficulty there. We talked about a lack of staffing, like who's going to go around and take everyone's temperature and enforce the rules and everything. One of the big things is we talked about a sterile environment that isn't warm and inviting. Like some of these kindergartners, they're going to be scared. It's their first time away from mom and dad. And it's going to look like a very sterile environment where everyone's wearing a mask and you're not allowed to be next to anybody. And, we don't want their first step into their educational journey to be scary. And that's going to be very difficult. We talked about kids coughing. Kids get sick. Kids get colds. Kids get non-COVID diseases, and those aren't going away. But, as soon as a kid starts to cough and sneeze, are we going to send them home? Are we going to inform parents? Like, a lot of teachers will go to school with a bit of a cough, but now those teachers are going to be, okay, I have a cough today, I can't go to school. And it's tough to get subs even when there are teachers that go to school sick. So, there's going to be teachers that are going to just retire rather than go in. There's going to be classified that are going to retire rather than go in. So there's going to be a lot of difficulty with just staffing there. There's going to be kids that, I have a big test today, next period, I'm just going to take off my mask and refuse to wear it. You can just send me home. Like that's going to happen. And ultimately, there's no winning decision, but even one person dying is it's a loss. So we need to make sure that we're not going to lose. Even if it's not winning, let's not lose. And that's what we talked about.
Thank you, Michael, very much. Is there another
This
group?
is Joe from Route 9.
Yeah, Joe, thank you.
Hi, so I can be, I'll try to be very succinct with all that's already been said. Much of the communication or conversation in Room 9 really focused on immediate next steps, and the immediate next steps around clarity and communication. Every detail that you've brought up as a collective committee is on all of our minds. Could not say that better. I think when Joanne said something, what the survey told us, and then went into that, and that kind of coincided with how our room was talking about what did the survey tell them, because the letter was very clear that accompanied it, and yet when we read through the comments, we see really clearly that none of what was communicated really sunk in. Really, we need to communicate around just a couple of points. The flexibility with which we're approaching the model, consistently reinforcing that, yep, we want to move toward in-person learning, but remote learning is an option. That what Brenda Hunt said, that built within the model is the ability to pivot for wherever we're directed. What Michael said just a minute ago, that we need to communicate whether you believe information A or information B, and just address that directly. Here are the requirements we're forced to operate under. It's not an option for us, no matter what the community believes, but acknowledging that. And then within that, what those specific safety requirements are, not just for Monroe and what we're doing, but what every school's safety requirements are, so that we're part of this collective operating under the same requirements. I mean, just providing the opportunity for clarity. And then I think also within that communication that goes out Monday and after, how we communicate our empathy for the parents who responded. We know you want kids in class full time. We know you don't want your kids in class at all until we can guarantee 100% safety. Wherever you're at, we are hearing you loud and clear and trying to find the balance that works for as many people as possible. Another emerging theme away from that, just that stuck out to me, is this theme of concern around quality of education in the comments, and really the acknowledgement that some families are going to go after competing products, right? Systems that are already set up online. Just to summarize some of what the group, do we have time? If we go for option B1, do we have the time between now and September 9th to move into option B1 thoughtfully? And we might. I'm just echoing that. Is there anything else? The last point is even among committee members, and we heard this in the share out, the need to maintain consistent communication within the group. I think Todd at the very first comment, brought up option or the half-day option, and what happened to that when we communicated through the survey. So there's still some communication gaps happening just within the committee itself. And so I think that's everything that was not previously said by other rooms. So, and something we get hammered on routinely, right? Communication, and we work hard at it. They're always going to find ways to nail us on areas where we're not, and the survey provides opportunity to, again, respond or to speak to our flexibility, safety planning, and empathy. So I'll take a step back.
Great, thank you very much. Is there another group that I've left off? I didn't think so, but I just wanted to check. Well, thank you for very comprehensive, very serious dive into those questions and very helpful information that you've shared. I'm going to turn it over to Justin and Kim now to just do a brief debrief back of some of the important points that they've heard that they're going to pursue further here.
Kim, I'm going to let you start today because I've started the last one. We should have flipped a coin beforehand.
No, this is great. That way you get to say the final word too. So there are 4 things that I really took away from this. Safety is a priority, and there's not a simple way to keep people safe. There's so many complex issues to this. There's still so many things that we're learning. And so we need to be aware of that. Keeping kids safe, keeping our teachers and our staff members and our bus drivers and everybody safe is really not going to be an easy one. Equitable access is still a concern, whether it's technology or whether it's kids who are going to be at home without a family member or somebody who's a little bit older who can help them. But there's a lot of issues around equity that we still have to continue to talk about. The third one, online has to be better, whether it's hybrid or completely online. We just have to do better than what we did in the past, and really look at what are some best practices out there, what are some other districts learning, what are some things that teachers in our own districts are already doing that we could learn from and share. And this one is really key for me, and that's the reason I put it for. This has to be a community effort, and I think we have to remember that this is our students, this is our staff, this is our families, this is our daycare providers and our community. And so we just need to make sure that we're taking care of one another and that we're being very respectful of one another and that we're continuing to listen to one another.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, I think as I was listening to a few people point out I think the kind of the polarization of the responses of our community. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. Those of us that have been in Monroe for a long time, I think that's what makes this community great. Is that not only do we have those separate opinions, and I think I use the word polarized viewpoints, but it's not a polarized community. We are able to come together, and so. I think that's the challenge that we have as the educational system in Monroe is that, we predicted, I laughed with Spencer, and I think bargaining with Shaerie over the last 10 years, the one thing that I know that is not fun for the MEA is to try to determine when our breaks should fall and how we should bargain those vacation times. Robin, that's something that I'll just give you a heads up if Shaerie hasn't already. Boy, trying to figure out with almost 400 members when we should have our 180 days land is typically one of the most challenging parts of the negotiation for both sides. You just can't make anyone happy, and I think we talked about that. I think just personally, right? Like I was sharing with my executive cabinet and a few of my elementary principals today. I've been attending the new superintendent's event from Washington Association of School Administrators. And we have people rotate through, superintendents from around the state come in and talk to us about different aspects and elements of being superintendent. And kind of the terrible joke that's not really funny on Thursday, and it wasn't funny really on Monday, is what a great time to be in your first superintendency, right? What a great time to take the role. And that being said, this is my dream job. 10 years ago when I got to Monroe as the executive director, and then finished my doctorate as a member of this educational community. This is where I raised my kids. This is where I live. This is where I always wanted to be a superintendent. And I'm confident in the abilities of us, who we are, Monroe School District, our teachers, our classified staff members, our administrators, our community members. We can do this. So I was talking to my mother-in-law about her dad, she grew up here. Many of you saw her at the Educational Foundation event a couple years ago, 60 years ago. At that point, she was the valedictorian of Monroe High School. And her dad, her dad rode a horse to Soap Lake to pick up her mother, then his bride, and rode back on the horse back to Monroe, and in the early 1900s, and that that I share that story because that epitomizes who we are as people. That is the history of Monroe, is that loggers, berry farmers, scratching out a living, right? And yes, is this a huge challenge for us? Absolutely. But we accept that challenge, and we're going to keep all of our people safe, and we're going to make good choices. And to Kim's point, we know, and our teachers know, and our staff and our administrators know that what we did in the spring is not going to be the same as what we do moving forward. And we're going to learn, and we're going to improve, and we're going to support one another, and we're going to get better. I think there's a lot of things that I heard that I've thought about and I know are going to be in front of us as far as the technical challenges of having school in this COVID environment, and with that ultimate precept of safety that continues to guide us and make sure that is in the forefront of our minds moving forward. And the desire that we all have to help our kids learn and grow and become better, and to become prepared citizens moving forward. And so, that is our driver, and we're going to do that through those lenses. So, man, I just appreciate the time that each of you spent thinking about those things and helping us with those things. And we're going to continue to move forward and know that, we're going to take each of those pieces and lift that as well as we can for each of those circumstances and phases that we're going to be in moving forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say again, it's very impressive to hear your conversations over the and what you shared. And, it's not to be, Pollyanna, and it encourages me to think that, yes, you're going to absolutely get through this because of the kind of conversations that you can have with one another. And as a community, you're going to work your way through a difficult situation. I have every confidence in that because of the nature of how you're interacting with one another. So I'm encouraged. And at the same time, it isn't easy. It's both. And so we're going to be coming back again next Thursday. It's the last meeting that we have scheduled. And we'll be trying to put basically all of this into a context, and then also think about next steps, which would include next steps of how you can continue to be involved in this process, both in a formal way within the structure of the district, but also I'm going to plant this seed in an informal way in your relationship with your community members that you interact with. Because ultimately, we know this is true. This has always been true. It's not unique to the times that we're living in. People trust organizations less than they trust people that they know. And you have a wonderful reputation as a school district, and people always trust people they know more than they trust organizations. And so one of the things that I'm going to encourage you all to do is to think about, once we get to some, the final clarity of where we're going in terms of next steps, that you each take part of it as your role to talk with people your neighbors, people that you work with, because that is the method in which we build a community of trust around the direction that we're going. And again, just having heard the conversation that you've had today, I have every confidence that you'll do that phenomenally well. And over time, people will come to understand that the decisions that we're going to make, we have to make them. And we're trying to think about the best interests of the community in doing that, and taking as many perspectives as possible in order to do so. So with that, that kind of wraps us up for today. Next Thursday, we're back at 4 o'clock, July 30th. Anyone have any commentary about today's meeting? Any reflections about it? Anything you'd like to share for the good of the order? Anything at all?
I just have a comment, maybe a question, if it's okay.
Sure.
And, to your point about trying to communicate individually with people, I've had a lot of people asking me, and I want to make sure that I'm communicating this accurately. So what people are asking, especially given what North Shore has done and Lake Washington has done, they're asking, are we going to be online in the fall, or are we going to be potentially doing this hybrid thing? And my response, based on what I think our position is, and that's where I want clarity, is that as long as the state superintendent and the health department are allowing for us to be hybrid, our decision as a district is that we're going to be hybrid. The only thing that would prevent that is if there's something that stands in the way in terms of state or health department that says that we can't. Versus what North Shore and Lake Washington have done is they said, hey, we don't know what the health department's going to do, what the superintendent's going to do, but we're deciding to go to an online model only. I guess I just want to make sure, am I being too simplistic in that? Am I expressing it accurately? If you guys could address that, I think that would go a long way in us trying to communicate this out to the community.
Yeah, so I started last week, Todd, by saying, things have shifted a little bit, and so we had an interesting meeting with Snohomish County Health Department this week, and that led to a scheduling of another meeting with Snohomish County superintendents on Tuesday. So I should have more information from Snohomish County Health. Unfortunately, I think there would be more guidance if we weren't in a primary election right now. And I don't mean to politicize any of that, but I truly believe that both Chris Rakedahl and Governor Inslee at the moment are engaged in a primary election cycle. And it will be interesting to see what happens after August 4th. I think, the governor's, his press conference today was, I don't know, I didn't attend, but I had people who attended, and they said, yeah, there wasn't anything really new, wear your mask and be socially conscious and socially distant, and, do our part to reduce this, and the things that he's said. I think, those pieces are still on the table. And I think that's why you've not seen Snohomish County school districts join King County School District. King County School Districts had a meeting with King County Health Department. And it was pretty much after that meeting with King County Health Department that you saw Renton, and you saw, North Shore and Highline. You saw those districts kind of fall in line with 100% online. And so we haven't had that direct communication with Snohomish County Health yet. So I don't know, obviously we have our labor partners we've got to talk to and work with them. But at this point, we haven't been told by the health department that we can't do that. They've shared that, I asked the question on Tuesday. I said, so it's hard for me my logic model, it's difficult for me to put this through my logic model. The governor has moved phase 3 back to 10 people. And our high school has, let's just use 1,600. So making the decision to go hybrid at Monroe High School is the decision to bring 800 students in with about 115 staff members into a building. How does that align with the governor's statement that phase 3, that was up to like 50 people, had to move back to 10 people. And that, you know, essentially, I believe one of the things that he said today was most everybody should consider themselves in phase 1, I think is what he said, or something. But again, I wasn't in that press conference today. So I think what you're saying is accurate, Todd. I just wonder how politicized this situation is right now, and if we're not getting the information that we would if it wasn't a crime. And again, that's my armchair quarterback Monday morning, looking at it from a political perspective of, is the governor just not willing to say anything right now? Because, you know, my ballot's still sitting on my counter at home. I haven't filled that out. And based on what we saw in our response from our community, you can imagine or could predict maybe how that would go if he did come out and say, no, you know, King, Pierce, and Snohomish, you're not able to open because of your COVID cases right now. So I don't think it's inaccurate what you're saying. I just don't know that we're there yet, right? So we're still playing through those scenarios. And again, to your question, have we heard anything from Snohomish County? No, and I'll be very clear. Dr. Spitters told all districts that were at that meeting, it is a local decision to open schools in person or not, from his chair.
I just would like to add something that I think we've talked about and certainly thought a lot about is we want to open school again. We want to have staff members and we want to have teachers back in school. And I think we just keep hoping that the numbers are going to go down and we're going to be able to do that. So we watched these numbers and at first it was kind of like, okay, looking good, looking good, looking good. And all of a sudden, I think it was like after the 4th of July weekend and some other things, numbers started going back up again. So we just keep hoping that people are going to be safe and people are going to take care of one another. Those numbers are going to go down, then we can safely reopen school. And, you know, it's going to get to a point where, you know, the numbers are just going to speak for themselves.
I feel scared about taking our community on a roller coaster ride. Like telling them one thing, then telling them another, then telling them another. I just feel like we don't have the answers yet. Because they want to be reassured that we can be in buildings. And I don't feel like I have the ability to reassure them that that can happen yet.
Well, I think these are all good questions. And I think that another week will give us some more time to get more clarity, hopefully. And so I just encourage us all to keep holding that thought and that idea, and we'll be back together again next week. But I think your question, Todd, was right on, which is how do you be able to communicate with those people that you know and tell them something that you can have some assurity that there's going to be some accuracy around it. So yeah, and I think partly what I'm hearing is that given the complexity of the factors, complexity of all the factors, the number of factors that are involved, we maybe can't have that kind of surety. The district has an intention to open as early as it possibly can. And we're still probably don't have enough information as to whether we can do that yet. So I appreciate everybody's commentary. I appreciate your participation in this. I know this is a hard and in some respects frustrating process, partly because we don't have enough information yet, and we're trying to fill in the gaps with it. But you're doing a fabulous job. As I said before, I have every confidence that you're going to come through this really well because of how you have approached it with a seriousness of intent and a willingness to listen to each other in such a respectful and thoughtful way. So I'm excited about that. Let's hold on to that thought. We'll be back together on Thursday next week, and I look forward to seeing you then.
I have a question.
Well,
Of course I do.
Is your question for everybody, Janelle, or?
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, so I'll just try and get through it briefly with an organized mind. So I feel like we're on a parallel course here. And over here on this side of the course, we're trying to do all the planning and the thought process and come up with everything that we need to do when we're back in the bodies and souls in the buildings. And over here, this is the part about the planning for back to school online, okay? And it feels like that's the way we're going. And I know, Justin, you've explained it and you've been real open about the meetings and all of that, okay? But I think I agree with some of the thoughts I've heard is that our community not knowing, you know, it makes a big problem for us, I think, down the road, you know, to be able to declare at some point, hopefully next week, we're going online for this amount of time until our numbers change, or we're going back to school in body and soul with all the safest ways that we can, okay? So either path we choose, are we really ready for it? We've been hearing about all the training that needs to happen, all of the classing and the scheduling and all of that needs to happen. Are we actually ready to be able to put into place the educational part of it in the buildings with all of the new techniques we have to use? And or are we really ready at this point with some of the things that need to come together to go all online? And I know there's meetings taking place behind these meetings. And I appreciate your comment earlier, Justin, about this isn't just like a, you know, a feel-good meeting. We're all here for a purpose. So it's like, are we ready no matter what we choose, right? And can we pull off either method without all the training taking place and maybe some of the, and on the safety stuff we've all been discussing? So that's my comment, and I'm going to stick to that and mute my microphone.
Well, I can't speak for Justin on this, but I can speak from a perspective of being in school district leadership for 40 years. This is what how I would respond to that. And again, I don't know your district as well as you folks do. Are we ready? No, we're not ready. We have to make a decision of what to explore before we can get ready. And once we make those decisions, then we put that energy into moving full speed ahead in terms of developing those plans. And we will, you know, I mean, this, I'm just speaking from an organizational perspective. We can't get ready until we know the direction that we're moving. And Janelle, you're exactly right. I mean, and Justin said this, and many folks have said this in all of the districts that I'm working with on this process. You know, there are two kind of extreme points where we're all back in school every day with everybody. And the other pole on that is nobody's in school every day. We're all working remotely. And then there are places in between. And those two, we have to plan for all of those eventualities. But first we've got to, this process was about trying to figure out what that middle road was going to be. And you've been helping with that part of it. So I'll get out of the way, and Justin, if you want to answer that question, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I would agree with Spencer is no, and I think you know, leading into, I mean, we weren't ready when COVID hit and schools closed and the governor closed schools, and you know, we weren't ready for that, and I applaud all of our teachers and administrators for what they did in the spring, and as we've admitted and said, you know, it's going to be better moving forward. You know, we started working with the Monroe Education Association, has started to work with them around those negotiations, knowing that, you know, we can start talking about some of the things, and then once we have the model, we can start talking about the specifics of that model and what that will look like moving forward. You know, I think there's some things that are universal in whether it's hybrid or 100% online Canvas, right? And so, you know, what are those pieces that we can identify and begin to move forward? You know, we had a meeting with our elementary principals today. You know, they've been thinking about the direction and the angles of how to support their staff moving forward. What's that going to look like to support students? Whether we're ready or not, you know, September 9th is going to be here before we know it. And we're going to have to be very intentional and very thoughtful about maximizing our time and supporting our teachers and supporting our staff, preparing our families, working with our community partners and understanding, you know, what we can do to leverage them, our YMCA, our Boys and Girls Club, I have a meeting with the Baptist minister on Tuesday to talk about their childcare options and pieces of that nature, of kind of thinking about, even within a hybrid structure, what are we going to do those other 3 days? And as they've thought about closing their preschool, I've just asked to sit down and talk with him and see if that's something that he could belay that or reinstitute that once our school starts, so that, you know, what is our capacity locally for childcare? Lots of questions about our own staff members. What do we do with their children? How can we support them in that? You know, there's a lot of things that we're going to have to play through and continue to work through. So yeah, those are, that's a pretty good synopsis, Janelle, of my world right now, and the things that are rattling around in my head and rattling around in the other 294 superintendents around the state. I can speak about the 21 that I'm involved with right now, who are brand new in their seats, and you know, the things that they're taking on in their communities. And again, that's, you know, I didn't mean to make light of it in sharing my mother-in-law's story of her mother and that. I just want to capture that as far as in Monroe, there is a grit that exists, and I've seen that in our staff, and I'm confident when we do have a very clear direction and purpose of where we're headed and what our goals are to achieve that, we will be successful in that. We have good people. We've been very intentional about hiring good people. And those good people can get a lot of things done together. And I know that that's what we're going to do moving forward for our students here in Monroe. So.
Thank you all. Really good conversation, great questions, great follow-up questions. And I really appreciate it. And I need to follow our norms in terms of ending on time, which I've already violated. So you can hold me accountable for that. But I appreciate it, and we will return to these conversations next week. Thank you.